The content of this podcast has not been evaluated by Health Canada or the FDA. It is educational in nature and should not be taken as medical advice. Always consult a qualified medical professional to see if a diet, lifestyle change, or supplement is right for you. Any supplements mentioned are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please note that the opinions of the guests or hosts are their own and may not reflect those of Advanced Orthomolecular Research Incorporated. Welcome to Supplementing Health, a podcast presented by Advanced Orthomolecular Research. We are all about applying evidence-based and effective dietary, lifestyle, and natural health product strategies for your optimal health. In each episode, we will feature very engaging clinicians and experts from the world of functional and naturopathic medicine to help achieve our mission to empower people to live their best lives naturally. Hello, thank you for joining me today for another episode of Supplementing Health. From infancy to old age, women are simply healthier than men. Out of the 15 leading causes of death, men lead women in all of them except Alzheimer's disease, which may be because many men don't live long enough to develop Alzheimer's. Although the gender gap is closing, men still die on average 5 years earlier than their wives. This month, we are focusing on conversations that can help men move the needle towards a healthier, longer, and more vibrant life. With me today to discuss irritable bowel syndrome and how it affects men is Michelle Probaga, naturopathic doctor. Michelle helps her patients overcome their unique health obstacles and educate them on how to integrate new health habits into their modern lifestyles for sustainable benefits. Welcome, Michelle. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this.
So you often hear about irritable bowel syndrome and irritable bowel disease, and they're used interchangeably. What is the actual difference between these two conditions?
Okay, so we have one, and it's irritable bowel syndrome. So the acronym is IBS. So you'll often hear that thrown around in conversations, IBS. And the other one is a category called IBD, and it's actually not called irritable bowel disease. It's actually inflammatory bowel disease. And there's a distinct difference between these two. IBS is considered a syndrome, so just an association of various kinds of clinical findings and symptoms, but there isn't an overt cause that can be identified from at least medical traditional medical standards, and there isn't like gross tissue damage inside parts of the intestinal wall. IBD, however, inflammatory bowel disease, is a category of two types of diseases, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And these are autoimmune conditions. There is actually a known cause because the immune system has then attacked itself, and therefore because of this quality of immune system, it's attacking parts of the intestinal tract, and it causes a gross amount of inflammation, which can be observed on like imaging studies. So you can pinpoint actual damage, and there's a known cause, which is an imbalance in the immune system. So those are the main differences between the two, but they often have very similar and overlapping symptoms. So it's through diagnostic testing and symptoms and possibly imaging studies and lab tests that you get to identify which particular concern you're dealing with in practice.
So then can IBS be cured?
So I always find the word cured funny because it's really about your definition, right? You know, I mean, in the traditional sense, a lot of things can be cured. And then there's a lot of things that have been deemed incurable. And you always have those outliers that can cure, that are somehow cured of like somehow like sporadic curing of cancer or something like that. You hear these random stories of people overcoming things that were deemed incurable. IBS, here's the thing with that. Our digestive system is influenced by so many different moving parts. What you eat, how you feel, toxin load, emotional stresses, liver toxicity. Are you making enough stomach acid? Are you making enough enzymes? Are your bacteria in check? Did you get a parasite? So the thing with like contributing factors to develop something like IBS, there are so many moving parts. So I find cure is more of like a relative term, or I usually like to say IBS in remission, because I find something can unravel that area of your digestive tract again if you're just not being mindful and taking care of it. But there is I find a place where people can feel like they're back in the control seat or in the driver's seat of their digestive issues, and it doesn't plague their day-to-day life anymore. They know that they can make certain choices that elevate their health and keeps them in a really balanced place, or they can make choices that might allow things to unravel again. So I find IBS, for the most part, you can really get a huge grip on it and feel so much better. But I usually find it's one of those things that's like, I like to say, in remission. You know, I'm someone who had IBS before, and I find that if I'm under a chronic state of stress, then little things will start to flare up again on me, right? So I usually I find that my digestive system is like my weakest link, right? It's the weakest point in my body, and it's my gauge for whether or not I'm taking care of myself. If life circumstances are overwhelming for me, am I eating the way that actually honors my body, or am I eating a way that like really deteriorates health? So I kind of use it as my gauge for health, but it's always something that I'm a little bit mindful of. So I'm not sure if we can say it can be 100% cured, but I think that you can really get a huge control over it, and that can change your quality of life immensely.
So then, if IBS is left untreated and unmanaged, can it lead to IBD down the road?
Yeah, so here's the thing. IBS is I consider it a condition that's more of a functional digestive disturbance. So there's an issue with how the digestive system is functioning. And if it is left untreated, then you can have further breakdown in function and further breakdown in function and further breakdown in function. And it leaves us innate a vulnerability in your digestive tract after. Now, autoimmune diseases like Crohn's colitis that are part of the IBD category, the inflammatory bowel disease category, in functional medicine and in naturopathic philosophies, often people have a predisposition or a possible genetic predisposition for an autoimmune condition. But it does the switch doesn't necessarily get flipped on unless the situation is the right kind of amount of chaos to just like flip that particular switch on. And a lot of people attribute the perfect storm within the digestive tract to be one of those things that can flip the genetic potential for an autoimmune condition to be turned on. So things like leaky gut, which people might have heard, food sensitivities, microbial overgrowth, those types of things have been shown to then put pressure on the immune system and allow for an imbalance where it might trigger an autoimmune condition. And for some people, that might mean the autoimmune condition is centered or localized to the gut, where you might end up with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or another autoimmune condition not part of that category called celiac disease, where when the immune system is triggered, it attacks itself and it attacks the intestinal wall for all three of those categories.
Okay,
So
yeah, that all makes sense.
yeah, the potential is there. It doesn't mean that that's the autoimmune condition that'll show up, but the potential is definitely there if your digestive tract and your digestive health is not properly managed. And what I find is for any autoimmune condition, gut health is primary number one. That's what you have to heal. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. It's like having the car in park and then pressing on the gas expecting to move forward. The gut has to be healed in order to repair any autoimmune condition.
Okay. And so is there an average age of onset for IBS or IBD?
So, great question. Things like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, statistics and research papers and medical literature tends to say that it's more prevalent in females. And it also says that age of onset typically is somewhere between the teenage years to age 40, where they start to see IBD symptoms start to come about. For conditions like irritable bowel disease, it tends to be between the age 15 to 35. It tends to be the most susceptible in the age category, but then there seems to be another category between the ages of 55 to 70 where they're starting to see that manifesting in that population as well. So it tends to have like a two-tiered population hit, 15 to 35 and 55 to 70 for the IBD.
And is it a similar age frame for the men that do suffer from those?
Yeah, that one doesn't seem to be discriminatory against males or females, although I find females tend to be more susceptible to digestive things like IBS. IBD, I haven't necessarily come across something that says otherwise. I think it's a little bit more even keeled.
Okay, and so statistically, Canadians suffer from one of the highest rates of IBD in the world. What do you think, from your experience, contributes to that?
So great question. I was doing a course or webinar, I think it was a couple of years ago, and they were actually looking at immune system function and autoimmune conditions. And with regards to things like IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, because it is an autoimmune condition, I think that this particular research that they conducted will speak to why IBD is more prevalent in, say, a country like Canada. They found that autoimmune conditions as a whole are increasing in prevalence in more industrialized and modernized countries and societies. And when they compared people who lived in more rural areas, who lived more on farms, were connected more with earth, or people who were in less affluent countries who were living a little what would be deemed more of an impoverished life, where there was more contact with dirt or microbes and less computers, less indoors, less stress, less corporate world, they found that autoimmune conditions were just less prevalent in those particular countries. And some conclusions that were drawn from that were because they were more connected to the earth. Their immune system was constantly being the muscle of the immune system was constantly being flexed and strengthened because they had a much more robust exposure to different microbes and pathogens that are inherently how we develop our immune system. They also concluded that by having better sun exposure, by being more active, by eating less processed foods, by eating less chemically burdened food, by being around less chemical exposure, all of those things create less like they had less of that burden on the body, so their immune system was able to work more advantageously, more balanced, and more um, in favor of how it had to protect the body. An autoimmune condition is when there seems to be some kind of miscommunication or hiccup in communication, and then the body begins to attack itself when the immune system is triggered. And the conclusions from the study were the way we live in modern society. Yes, our advances have been incredible for so many things, but in other ways it's left us very short. Despite our advances in certain kinds of technologies and medical advances, chronic health conditions have continued to increase, and conditions like autoimmune conditions and allergies, another immune issue, have begun to become inflamed in this modern societies. And the conclusion is that it has to do with our disconnect from nature, our disconnect from nutritious foods, our disconnect from sunlight and proper exercise. We're indoors all day, we're not breathing fresh air, we're surrounded by chemicals, and all of this just continues to burden the body to the point where it begins to break down, and then there can be a disruption in function because of that. So when you cite a statistic saying that Canada is one of the most prevalent for IBD, that does not surprise me at all based on that type of research when it comes to autoimmune diseases in general. And then you have to add in the factor that um, we do so many things, unfortunately, in modern society that really affects digestive function. Chronic stress greatly affects digestive function. And stress isn't necessarily somebody feeling quote unquote stressed and angry and agitated or anxious. Chronic stress could be sitting in Toronto traffic, because I'm from Toronto and it's horrendous. Chronic stress can be your boss yelling at you. Chronic stress could be financial stress. Chronic stress can be actually internal, where there is an excessive amount of inflammation. So now your body's on high alert all the time. And that in and of itself creates stress hormones. When your body is in a chronic state of stress, digestion is not prioritized. Because when your body feels like under a state of attack, it's feeling like it has to send its resources and arm its defensive for whatever it feels like it's being attacked by. Digestion is not held number one in that moment. It's kind of deprioritized. So when you're not prioritizing digestion, it's bound to have more breakdown. It's bound to have hiccups in function, and you're bound to start to express certain kinds of symptoms. which then leave a vulnerability for other things to begin to develop, possibly like an IBD. And then we have to factor in how much processed food we eat in North America as well. All this type of food that our body doesn't actually recognize, that comes along with chemicals and genetic modification or hybridization of grains, is a really big one, where our body no longer recognizes a lot of these molecules and it's not able to break them down. And then that in and of itself creates digestive issues and local upset in the digestive tract, possibly inflammation in the tissue, and then symptoms like diarrhea or constipation or excess gas or stinky gas and things like that. And so now we have this stage for a highly vulnerable area in our digestive tract for anything else to begin to manifest.
And do you find any of those symptoms are more prevalent for men over women? Like, do both genders present with similar type symptoms, or can some of them be more tailored to one gender over the other?
It's interesting. Well, here's the thing. I find that women in general, I think, are a little bit more attuned to the subtle changes in their body, and they're more likely to voice something about that or seek help for it. So in my practice, I treat a lot of females with digestive health. It's probably like a 5-to-1 ratio, or maybe even more bigger ratio of female to male that I treat. However, from a symptom perspective, I find I like IBS, gas, bloating, all those things, it doesn't discriminate against male versus female. Now, females I find are a little bit more susceptible to things like gallstone development, which can then add further injury to digestive function, just with estrogen levels and how it affects bile production and possibly the formation of gallstones. Gallstones, we tend to be a little bit more vulnerable to that. But beyond that, I find gas, bloating, stinky poops, constipation, diarrhea, all the things that nobody wants to talk about. When it comes to digestive symptoms, if somebody comes to me with IBS, it can vary from person to person, regardless of what gender they are. They all have their unique kind of presentation of how those symptoms come up. So I don't really find there's a huge distinct difference between males versus females. I think that females are just more likely to come into the office and seek help for it, so I see it more frequently.
And as you just mentioned, generally speaking, men don't go to the doctor as readily as women do. So if there things that they can do at home to support their digestive issues prior to seeing a healthcare professional?
Absolutely. The foundational work is so important, and it's all things that you can do at home that doesn't require a pill, right? So we take a lot of things for granted. We kind of go into autopilot and we want things that are easy and convenient when it comes to like what we intake into our bodies from a fuel and food source. But we need to start being more mindful about our choices. So, men tend to be much more meat, potatoes, and beer kind of people, and women are more likely to eat a salad. we're just gonna we're just gonna put it out there, right? So women tend to have more fiber, more nutrient value, across the board as a general rule. As the patterns that I've seen, this is more of a likely scenario. So what I would say to men is begin to balance out your plate. It doesn't mean you can't eat a huge hunk of steak if that's what you really want, but do make sure that you have an ample amount of vegetables to be paired up with your meat, right? I find a lot of men are very meat centric and very protein centric, but vegetables tend to be like an afterthought, right? Where it should be more of a priority. And, I've been in a relationship with my current partner for about 7 years, and only now, despite my trying to hammer it in, the benefits of it, and him seeing how I eat, when he eats with me, he feels so much better, but he just could not take the initiative for himself. But it took him a few years to finally realize and connect the benefits of eating that way and beginning to um, prioritize that for himself and be an advocate for eating healthier for himself. And he's reaping the benefits. Now he loves to brag to me about how much better he feels, and how, full disclosure, how much better his poops are in the morning, and how he doesn't feel so bloated, and how he's able to lose weight better, and his energy's better, and his sleep is better, and all these things because he's prioritized a healthier eating habits. So getting an abundance of vegetables is really, really important. Getting abundance of green vegetables is extremely important. So what I usually say as a rule of thumb is half of your plate should be non-starchy vegetables. So like your greens, your peppers and your cucumbers, cabbages, cauliflower, all of those things. But an ample amount of greens, in addition to all the colorful vegetables, is already a really big win when it comes to balancing out your meals. So if you're thinking about pie charts and you're looking down at your plate and you're trying to fraction it off like a pie chart, try to make half of it an ample amount of those non-starchy veg. And then when it comes to the carbohydrates, I would encourage men to not just depend on the breads, the pastas, and the grains for carbohydrates. Yes, they're easy. Yes, they're convenient, but they tend to be the things that have been the most um, chemically altered, genetically modified, and have had the most food scientist kind of influence on them. And sometimes our body no longer, sometimes it doesn't recognize them anymore, or they tend to be more inflammatory now because of our interventions that we've done to make them in such mass production. So I would say focusing less on grains all the time. It doesn't mean you can't eat grains, doesn't mean everybody has to be gluten free, but trying to change it up. Pick different sources of carbohydrates. You know, don't always take white potatoes. Sometimes pick sweet potatoes. Sometimes pick purple potatoes. You can also try different root vegetables like cassava root, or a Jamaican sweet potato, or you can try squashes. All variety of squashes are a source of carbohydrates, and they're very healing to gut tissues too, especially roasted, and they're super yummy. Throw some salt, olive oil, some spices, throw them on a roasting pan, and just let them cook for like a good 25 to 30 minutes. And they're delicious and easy on the digestive system and can be very healing for the digestive system. And I would also say other root vegetables. So look at things like carrots, beets, turnips, parsnips, rutabagas. I would include those as sources of carbohydrates. So creating more variety is really, really important, and not just having the same thing day in and day out. You know, our body is made of a robust amount of bacteria and different kinds of microbes within our gut. It's called our microbiome. It's this really important ecosystem that lives inside our digestive tract. The balance and the health of that ecosystem greatly influences your digestive function and your overall health and well-being. There is such a diverse amount of microbes that have to live in our gut, and they feed off of and are fueled by fibers and the non-ferment and fermentable kinds of sugars and starches that we get from vegetables, legumes, grains, and starchy vegetables and fruits. So creating a higher variety of what you eat actually creates a higher variety of food and fuels to feed the diversity of our microbiome as well. So not only are you getting a higher amount of nutrients that support optimal digestion and poop production and reducing poor bacteria, you're also feeding the good bacteria by balancing out your plate this way. So I find that that's a really big thing that most men could probably begin to just be more considerate of.
And I actually have two questions that came out of all of that. One, is there a particular type of diet then that if someone wanted to follow, say like whole th whole 30 or whole food 30 or Mediterranean or low FODMAP or any of those, is there one or a few of those particular diets that are better for supporting the digestive tract then over others?
Absolutely, but I find diets always got to be individualized. I find that as a good starting point, the Mediterranean diet is is pretty good, but I would actually say something like the paleo diet is a really good starting ground. Not meant for everybody, but it's a good starting ground, because how they describe portioning plates in eating is the way that I would give general instructions to people to begin to just set a better foundation, where it is healthy, clean proteins. So whether it's animal or vegetarian or vegan-based proteins, making sure you're choosing clean sources that haven't been excessively manipulated by man with chemicals or genetic modification or whatnot. Those are going to be really important. Having a good amount of clean, healthy fats. So avoiding things like inflammatory oils, like your peanut oil, your vegetable oil. Throw away the margarine. It's terrible for you. The canola oils and rapeseed oils and peanut oils, those are so inflammatory. So you want to focus on a good serving with each meal of your healthy fats that come from whole free run eggs, from avocados, from olive oil, from coconut oil, from organic grass fed butter or organic grass fed ghee. Having an abundance of fruits and vegetables, mainly vegetables, on your plate, and having a more mindful portion of carbohydrates and not just always being grain dependent on the carbohydrates. I find the paleo diet tends to cover those kinds of categories. Now, after that, it might have to become more specific based on the individual's needs. So some people might have to do a low Fodmap diet. IBS can benefit from a low Fodmap diet, but this diet should never be something that someone's on indefinitely. It should be used strategically and for a very concise period of time to help them overcome the bacterial imbalance that is contributing to their IBS symptoms and their IBS symptomatology. So that type of diet, low FODMAPs, is not sustainable long term, and it should be used acutely and strategically with a really mindful treatment plan. Things like the Whole30 diet is also very clean. It's a little bit more restrictive, I think, than the paleo diet, in the sense that you're eliminating a lot of common food allergens or inflammatory foods, which obviously in the long run is really good. So that could be something people can experiment with. But I find, general rule of thumb, I'm following typically in a general rule paleo-esque type of recommendations, and then after that I will get individualized with treatment care for clients. And for a lot of people with digestive concerns, I will go and run testing for food sensitivities so that they can identify uniquely for them what are the foods that are most irritating, that they may need to take a temporary or an extended break from to allow for the body to fully reset, rebalance, and strengthen and function again. So I don't think there's a one size fits all for diet. I don't think there's a one size fits all for anything for anyone, to be honest with you. It always has to be individualized, but I find, like I said, the paleo diet tends to have a really good jumping point to begin to maximize your diet on your behalf.
That all makes total sense to me. I know I actually used to suffer from symptoms of IBS, and I know when I found out what my food sensitivities were and ate more paleo-esque, it wasn't true paleo as in following it exactly, but definitely more in that style. Um, it totally changed things, and now I can enjoy some of those foods that I do have sensitivities to in moderation, and so it's definitely shifted back to less restrictive, less rigid, but now night and day compared to where I was before when things were inflamed and angry, shall we say.
Oh yeah, totally, totally. Because I mean, I'm an previous IBS sufferer myself, and I had to do things where I started to realize gluten was a thing just by trial and error. I started to realize that bread was affecting me, and the symptoms would come on almost 3 hours later. I'd be doubled over in pain, and I finally clued into what it was. So I was careful, but then it became a slippery slope where I'd have a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more, and then my symptoms would flare up again. And then my body hit a breaking point several years ago where stress was at an all-time high for various reasons, including like my father getting sick. I left one of my clinics. I started my own business. Like there was like a breakup in my relationship. Like there were so many things that was just, I was an emotional basket case, like in all sense of the words. And I was just running on fumes, and I was emotionally eating too in addition to that. And everything just literally fell apart. I lost so much weight. Food would not stay in me. It was a terrible moment. And then I finally bit the bullet, and I was like, okay, just, gluten is not a good thing for you, but I think it's beyond that. And I was like, just fork out the money, run some tests, figure it out. And I finally invested in a food sensitivity test for myself, which showed leaky gut at that time because my body was just so broken, so broken. But my biggest hitters were gluten and dairy was high, and eggs were high temporarily. I had to be careful around eggs for a while too. And in addition to that, I had to look at microbiome stuff and stress resiliency. And that really made me pivot with regards to stress resiliency too, and working on my mental emotional health, because that is what now keeps me in a much better place. So when stress, you know, really escalates, my body doesn't fall apart under the damage of stress anymore, right? So that was a really big part of my journey. But like you were mentioning, having had to go through that and being more, I don't want to say restrictive because I feel like restrictive has a very negative connotation, but having to be very mindful of my food choices during that healing time was absolutely necessary. And I had to get over that hump. And now I like to say gluten is still probably my kryptonite. Like I could just live, I'm half Italian. I just want to eat focaccia bread. But like I really do. I just want to dip it in oil and just, but I say that now I'm 99% gluten free. So I haven't been tested for celiacs because at that point in my life when things were so terrible, I just wanted to feel better and I could not fathom continuing to eat something that I knew didn't agree with me just for the sake of confirming this test and having to possibly wait 2 to 3 months to see the specialist and still feeling terrible. So I've never been actually tested for celiacs. I just pretty much avoid gluten. But if I go on a vacation, like I did go to Italy, maybe about a year after that whole dramatic event in my life, I was able to enjoy moments, but I didn't go out of my way to eat a whole bowl of pasta at every meal. I didn't go out of my way to eat pizza at every meal. Like I would choose a risotto. I would have, like an ossobuco or something like that. And I would have some bread on the side, but I brought digestive enzymes. I was very mindful of my choices and I was still able to enjoy my vacation and enjoy those moments without being completely derailed. And then when I came home, I knew how to get myself back on track and 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 feel my best again and do what I knew honored my body. But I can now pick and choose those moments like you said, and for your own experience, you understand now that if you make a choice there might be a small consequence, but that consequence isn't going to dictate the rest of your days anymore. You know how to bring it back in, you know how to bring yourself back to a place of feeling good again. And now you can just pick and choose those moments if you feel like it's worth it in the moment. And that's kind of the ultimate goal for people. And I always want people to get back to eating the highest variety of foods that they possibly can in a way that honors their body. And that might change depending on where you are in life, right? Like just like when people get pregnant, they can't stand certain foods. So just like when you get excessively stressed, your body might start to reject certain foods, or the stress plus the food might cause looser stool. So you have to just be more mindful about your diet choices in that more stressful period of time in your life. So I find that going through the process of working on your digestive health really is extremely empowering for people who suffered from digestive issues and really felt lost, confused, out of control. It felt like their digestion was just like you mentioned, like it was just angry all the time and you just didn't know how to soothe it. Where the ultimate goal is to get people to a place where they feel like that's not what dictates their life anymore. They dictate their life, they get to choose, right? And that's always what I want for people. I just want people to feel empowered with their health.
And you'd mentioned digestive enzymes. So, in your opinion, what role does supplementation play in managing and addressing poor digestive health?
Huge. Especially for the onset of healing, right? To get people to a place where their body is self sufficient again, you're likely going to need other interventions beyond food. Food and a healthy diet, healthy lifestyle choices. Like we have to also, give props to the fact that you need to drink good water, you need to get good sleep, you need to move your body, you need to find health and clarity and resiliency from a mental, emotional, and even spiritual standpoint, because that dictates your physical well being too. So that also has to be foundational. And that food and that nutrition, everything you eat, if you eat something every day that works against you rather than for you, you bet you're going to start to feel lousy eventually. So, that food and foundational work is so key because that's what's going to provide longevity to your healing process. But the supplements will need to be implemented typically at the onset of your healing process to really um, guide the course of treatment, to help redirect things in your body, to help rebalance things in your body, to help reset, to heal tissue, to strengthen digestive function, to like increase your stomach acid levels, to possibly support enzyme activity, to help your liver detox and clear out bile, or improve the consistency of your bile so you can absorb your fat so you don't have loose stools all the time. Supplements are going to be really important as long as they're used strategically, and your supplement protocol might change based on where you're at in your healing process. So, I mean, I'm not having people on the same thing for an indefinite period of time. We check in regularly and we adjust things based on how they adapted, how they felt, what stage of the healing they're at. So that's an important part of the process, right? Because sometimes there's so much damage that's done that you need that extra artillery and those extra tools to go in and help clean up that damage so that there's sustainability and we leave the body in a less vulnerable state so that you can continue to feel good for a long period of time. So supplements do play a big role.
And would you say there's any supplements in particular that you would use for the majority of digestive cases? Of course, there's always going to be outliers, but are there any in particular that you would say like 90% of the time are included in your protocols?
Yeah, people probably think I'm going to say probiotics, and that's not really the case. Even though it's like, oh, I'm going to see a naturopath, they're probably going to put me on a probiotic, and there's a very good chance we might, but it might not always be the first step because I find that for certain digestive conditions, adding in a probiotic is going to make your symptoms worse. If you have IBD, irritable bowel disease, whether Crohn's or colitis, and you're in the middle of a flare, adding a probiotic might trigger your immune response to be a little bit stronger, and it might actually irritate your autoimmune condition because your probiotics are a key and pivotal component of our immune system's function. And the wrong thing at the wrong time can be a really bad thing, disastrous for like healing process. So probiotics are not my go-to, despite what people probably think with digestive health concerns. Usually, I might introduce something like a really good fiber supplement to help regulate bowel movements, whether they have diarrhea or constipation, because that also begins to feed the good microbiome in an advantageous way, in a more balanced way. Gut healing and gut soothing nutrients, things like L-glutamine, can be very important at very strategic parts of the healing process, in addition to demulcents. So demulcents coat any kind of irritated intestinal tissue to help it heal. So it creates almost like a soothing mucosal-like layer. So just think about it this way, whenever you have an irritation in your sinuses, which is also mucous membrane, your body makes mucus. And mucus has like this thick kind of gooey consistency because what it's supposed to do is create a coating on the irritated tissue so that whatever virus, microbe, etc., doesn't continue to irritate the tissue, and it allows the tissue to heal. That's why we produce mucus. Our body's so incredible this way. And the same goes for our digestive tract, because our digestive tract is one big mucous membrane. So for symptoms, say like with IBD, with Crohn's and colitis, you might actually notice things like mucus in the stools because your body's natural defense to the irritation and to the damage to the intestinal walls and the inflammation there is to produce more mucus. So what we can do as a supplement is to implement demulcents that have mucus-like activity so that your body doesn't have to create so much mucus, and it allows the healing of the intestinal tissues to happen at a much better, rate and a better pace. So demulcents are things like deglycerinized licorice root, marshmallow roots, slippery elm. Those can be really important for the healing process. Sometimes I will look to digestive enzymes because at the end of the day, it actually takes a lot of energy to digest food, like a lot of energy. So if your energy needs to be conserved so that you can heal the digestive tissues, sometimes taking the pressure and the burden off the digestive tract a little bit is helpful for the healing process, and a really good comprehensive digestive enzyme can be part of that to allow us to just lift a bit of the burden so more energy can be redirected to the healing instead. So those can be some really big key players when it comes to healing digestive function. And then beyond that, if there is a microbial issue, that I'm adding in strategic antimicrobials or antiparasitics or anti-candida plus liver support. Because the digestion, we forget that it's more than one moving part. It's not just a stomach. It's your mouth, it's your stomach, it's your liver, it's your gallbladder, it's your pancreas, it's your small intestine, it's the microbiome in the small intestine, it's the large intestine. So there's a lot of moving parts to factor in and consider when it comes to assessing and managing IBS or IBD conditions. But supplements are going to play a really key role, 100%.
Awesome. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. There's been tons of information that you've shared, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about this topic because I think it does affect so many people, especially when you think of all those that suffer from IBS as well as those with IBD.
Absolutely. And I'm really happy to be a part of this conversation through Men's Health Month that you guys are focusing on, because I I would love to be able to support and help more men. I want men to be more connected to how they feel and to be more mindful about how they feel. I think we are past the stage in our evolution as a society where we're expecting men to just grin and bear it, suck it up, walk it off. The whole thing, you get an injury on like the field, oh yeah, just walk it off. No, no, we don't have to be tough all the time. You can ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness, it's actually a sign of empowerment to become the master and commander of your own body again, right? If you feel like things are out of sorts and out of control, ask for help. Digestive health is going to influence everything else. If you want to be able to lift weights and be strong and be healthy, you need to be able to absorb your nutrients. If you cannot do that from the digestive perspective, how much weight do you think you're going to be able to lift in the gym? Are you going to be able to be an active dad for your children? Are you going to be able to think clearly when you go to work if you have brain fog or you're exhausted all the time because your body's just inflamed? I think we have normalized a lot of symptoms as just part of, oh, this is just how it is in normal life. But excessive gas is not normal. Stinky gas is not normal. Having explosive poops is not normal. Constipation and diarrhea, or the flip flopping of those, is not normal. Acid reflux is not normal. Getting bloated, where you feel like there's a balloon in your stomach, is not normal. Having brain fog, feeling tired, not being able to wake up in the morning, having restless sleep, all of these things are not normal. And a lot of stuff actually stems from like improper digestive health. And I think that it's important to get men to think about their bodies differently and begin to become more attuned to that and just honor their bodies more. And that can begin with just what you put on your plate. Drink really good amounts of water, eat more vegetables, and at least start there. And I think that's a really good starting point. And also chew your food. Men eat really fast. I'm just going to throw that in there at the last minute. Chew your food. Digestion starts in the mouth, right? And that alone can make a huge difference to how everything else works downstream, because this is starting point, right? So chew your food well. If that alone is the take-home message, is like eat more vegetables, drink really good water, and chew your food, and just start to listen to your symptoms and ask for help, because you have the potential to feel so much better than you realize.
It's so true. Once you start feeling better, it's you wonder how you thought you felt good before, really, like at least in my experience.
Absolutely. A lot of people have no idea how much food impacts their health until they begin to take strategic breaks from it and actually assess their digestive health. And then they realize, they're like, I've been living in a cloud or in a fog, or like I was living suboptimal level of myself. Like there's such a higher level of my ability and my capacity to be present in this world and active and happy and joyful and energized and strong. And sometimes people don't realize that how much food affects us until you are challenged to actually think about what you eat and maybe make some adjustments. And then you're kind of like, whoa, like this is a whole new world. And I love working with men because it's such frank conversations, and you could joke around and you have a great time with it. And like the changes and that happen in them and their responses are so incredible. And they're just kind of like, how come nobody's told me this before? Right. So there's this level of a quality of life that might be untapped yet by you. And if you start to work on digestive health and start taking measures to eat in a way that actually energizes and fuels you properly, sky's the limit.
And so if our listeners want to work with you, how would they go about doing that?
So we can go to my naturopathic website, which is drmichelleND.ca. So drmichelleend.ca. I work in the Etobicoke location of the GTA, and I'm also in Georgetown. Virtual appointments are also available. Due to my license, I can only treat people who are also in Ontario. So if you're in Ontario and you wanted to begin to assess and work on your digestive health, then virtual appointments are available to you at both locations. And I'm also on Instagram, where I'm most active if people want to connect with me and kind of understand my message and learn some tips and tricks before they even want to commit to an actual appointment. My Instagram handle is dr.michelle_nd. And there I have like videos and helpful tips and all these wonderful things. And that's a really great way to start maybe getting you on track before you jump into a full commitment of an appointment if you're not ready for that step.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this talk. I really hope this connects with a lot of men out there.
Thank you for listening to Supplementing Health. For more information about our guests, past shows, and future topics, please visit aor.ca/podcast or aor.us/podcast. Do you have a topic you want us to cover? We invite you to engage with us on social media to request a future topic or email